Okay, so our theme of the day today is called Calm, Cool, and Connected. And it's really going to focus on the process of learning to regulate, which is, the way that we learn how to manage or kind of control our thoughts and our emotions and our energy. For most children, we know the process of regulation starts with co-regulation. So, those supports that kids receive from their caregivers. So we're going to also talk about caregivers' roles in helping kids learn how to regulate. Sorry, I have to do my PowerPoint here. Let me know if y'all can't see the PowerPoint. So to start off, let's kind of talk about soothing. We're going to talk about how children and teens learn to regulate at different developmental stages. So we're going to start with babies here. How do babies learn how to regulate? What soothes the baby? What helps them in moments of distress or comfort? Any opinions here? So we know that for babies, it's going to be different. There's lots of different things that we can do. Some babies like to be bounced. The baby that I nanny, he's a big bouncer. He doesn't like when I sit and hold him. He has to be bounced. Some babies just need to hear, a caregiver's voice, things like that. That's how we kind of figure out what strategy is best. Babies are going to respond individually. They're going to have these different preferences, even so young. And so we kind of do this testing to kind of figure out what's going to work best. So when teaching self-regulation, context really matters. The effectiveness of whatever our soothing strategies are, that's going to depend on the child's current emotional state, the environment that they're in, and even the caregiver or the adult that's providing the interaction. So what ways do we regulate infants? We're going to start regulating infants by keeping ourselves calm. Infants, we know, are kind of instinctively tuned in to their caregivers' emotional and behavioral responses. And so as a result, it's really important for us as caregivers to feel regulated ourselves as we try to support infant regulation. We're not going to do a very good job if we're in a high emotional state or a negative emotional state. We're not going to be a very good teacher. We also regulate infants by learning to read their signs. So, regulation is going to be supported by the adult's ability to tune into and effectively respond to the baby's clues and underlying needs for, whether that's play or soothing or sleep. We have to kind of tune in and learn about the different signs that babies might put off. We regulate infants by learning their preferences. So kind of like we just talked last slide, over time, we're really going to learn about what babies prefer. And for regulation strategies, the rocking versus bouncing versus padding, things like that. And it's really going to be we're going to learn through a process of experimentation and trial and error. Here's a couple more here. Having daily routines can really help regulate infants. When I started nannying my little 7-month-old that I have now, we were on a very, very strict routine. So, that's something that a lot of caregivers do, is to develop kind of those daily routines and rhythms, feeding, bedtime, bath, whatever, play. And so we kind of do this often to help us organize and manage our daily tasks. But this is actually like a really good, important foundation for the infant's early ability to regulate themselves and develop a feeling of safety in the world. So routines can be really grounding for infants and children. And the final one that we talk about is just connecting throughout the day, connecting and engaging throughout the day. That's how we're really going to support regulation, just by having regular engagement and connection throughout the day, rather than only when the infant is experiencing distress or discomfort. So making that kind of a regular thing and not only when things are upsetting. So what does all of this do? When regulation support is kind of consistently offered and provided to the infant, that baby's going to experience security and comfort and connection to another person. So regulation support provides that infant with kind of a felt understanding that feelings aren't going to last forever. And, they might kind of come and go and have a beginning and ending point. Excuse me. So the infant's going to learn that a primary function of connection is to increase their internal sense of comfort and safety. So when this continues over time, children are going to learn. Now, development of regulation capacity is progressive, and it builds and it becomes more sophisticated over time, or at least that's the goal. So infants learn to understand their inner experiences initially because others are kind of reading and responding to their needs effectively. So one of the primary skills that a caregiver uses to kind of tune in to a young child's needs is reflection. So, you hear caregivers saying things like, oh, you're hungry, oh, you're happy, you're mad, things like that. So when that caregiver is reflecting the infant's or child's experience back to them, they begin to learn how to label that internal experience that they're feeling. And they kind of start to learn how to differentiate between emotions and body states. So, learning that mad is different from sad, or hungry is different from tired. And labels that we provide over time are kind of adopted and offer a child or teen language for their experience. And so similarly, the earliest foundation for communicating begins in infancy. Babies, might learn that if they cry, someone's going to come and soothe them, or if they put their arms up, someone's going to pick them up. If they smile, someone's going to smile back at them. The communication skills are going to build on this early foundation, become more sophisticated and kind of more direct as children learn to talk. And so when their caregivers are able to provide consistent support for soothing throughout the day, especially in those moments of distress, the growing child kind of begins to internalize the felt comfort experienced in those moments of co-regulation, and the internal sense of comfort helps them increase their tolerance for distress and bounce back more quickly and become more resilient. And then as the infant moves into toddlerhood and, from being a toddler into childhood, there's going to be an increasing ability to use strategies with less support from the caregiver and more independence, which is great. But at the same time, caregivers are going to still be that primary source of regulation and comfort, at least when they're still young. So if we think about some of the kiddos that we might interact with, what happens when a baby or a toddler or child or teen doesn't experience the early support for regulation? We know that these kids are going to struggle a lot more, even with basic regulation skills that kind of might be expected of them based on their chronological age. So when you're parenting older children or teens, it can feel really unnatural to teach really basic regulation skills. So, we would expect a 10-year-old to have the ability to identify basic emotions, or we would expect a 16-year-old could kind of have, a big repertoire of effective coping strategies for when they're upset. But often, that's really not the case with some of the kids that we see. If a child or teen in our home hasn't had consistent support for regulation, their self-regulation skills may not have developed kind of at all. And so to make this even more complicated, a child or teen who hasn't experienced that early co-regulation might not learn that relationships are a source of calm and comfort. Instead they might have learned that the opposite's true, that relationships are chaotic and frightening. And this is one reason why it may be really hard for children to feel safe in relationships in general. And it might make it more challenging for you to figure out how to provide those regulation opportunities and co-regulation support. So these kiddos who haven't had early co-regulation, they might have difficulty understanding, communicating, and managing their feelings. So if an individual doesn't have consistent exposure to reflection and labeling of those emotions early on, then they're not going to have the language needed to help them organize and label their own experiences. And so in response to questions about feelings, a really common thing that we hear is, I don't know. They literally might not know how to put their feelings in their internal states into words. We know that a lot of children have experienced a lot of early kind of misattunements, not being seen accurately by the adults taking care of them, or not having adults pay attention to their feelings at all. And so children might also kind of defend against very hard emotional states like sadness or fear due to that sense of shame and vulnerability. And as a result, kids might only be able to identify and access a really limited number of emotions. So, a child might say, I am mad, but never can say I'm sad. They might only have one frame of reference, and they might mislabel their emotions. And so we have to remember that lens for others that we always talk about in the earlier sessions. That lens for others, coupled with that lack of consistent ability to label emotions and emotional cues, is also really going to affect the child or teen's ability to read emotions in others. So they might have developed kind of this expectation that others might be potentially threatening or dangerous, and they might misperceive others' emotions or intentions. So they might perceive anger or danger in other people's facial expressions and their tone of voice, things like that, even when that might not actually be the case. On to this one. So they also might have difficulty communicating their feelings. We've talked about how children and teens who've experienced trauma might have very little language for their experience, which is going to make it really hard to communicate their emotions to other people. But trauma is also going to interfere with a child's ability to access language when they feel unsafe or are reminded of past trauma, even subtle reminders of past trauma. So if you guys remember the express road to action, when children are on the express road, we know that the thinking parts of their brains, the logical parts of their brains, which includes the language centers, those logical parts of their brain shut down. And that makes it even more challenging to use words to describe what they're experiencing. And we know that language allows all of us to communicate our experience directly, but that absence of language or lack of access to language means that a child has to use other strategies to communicate their wants and those needs. So the indirect ways of communicating might be really confusing to us or difficult for us as caregivers or other people to read and respond to effectively. And then just a little, another reminder here is that cultural beliefs and practices might also affect how a child expresses their emotions. So we know that some cultures believe that keeping problems to yourself is the way to behave, and not discussing emotions with others, things like that. So we have to keep things like that in mind as well. And then difficulty managing feelings. So to manage your feelings effectively, you have to have some sort of understanding of what the feelings are, first of all, and kind of where they come from. And you have to have a repertoire of strategies for dealing with them, including access to different supports in your circle. And in the absence of those things, it's really common for children to become very overwhelmed by things that might seem kind of minor to other people. We've discussed this before. So for example, some kiddos, if you have a minor schedule change during the day, it might trigger a huge fear response in them if their early caregiving environment was really chaotic. Something as small as that might be a trigger for them. And so that human danger response, that express road, it often creates this experience of going kind of from 0 to 60 in less than a minute. So when upsetting feelings when upsetting feelings happen, they kind of tend to become big really quickly. And this can really overwhelm and be scary for the child or teen who's experiencing them. And when overwhelmed, children and teens kind of will do whatever it takes to make themselves feel better in that moment. And so a really common strategy that we see is disconnection, just disconnecting from feelings that are uncomfortable and overwhelming, because in the moment that makes them feel better. And that's kind of one of those primitive, survival-based strategies used in early childhood. Those strategies often continue to kind of be the go-to strategies for later in childhood and adulthood, if not corrected. And this can really prevent the children or child from developing more sophisticated and age-appropriate coping skills. And we know that as challenging emotions get more complicated, the strategies that kiddos and teens use to manage them can often become more risky, especially those kids who are moving into the early stages or late stages of adolescence. Risky behaviors, like self-harm, aggression, substance abuse, things like that. Those can be reframed as coping strategies that are designed to provide immediate relief from overwhelming or distressing emotions. So we know that we have to remember that all this is going to be harder when a child or even yourself are on the express road. We've talked a lot about the express road, how it affects our ability to think and to regulate. And we know this kind of alarm system is designed to ensure that a child or teen's survival is being kept within the moment. That's the whole goal. And so when the express road is activated, or the alarm system is activated, the child might lose whatever ability they have for those in the moment regulation tools, no matter how rudimentary or primitive those skills are. They might completely lose it when they're on that express road. So if we think about Miss Olivia here, a little update on her. It says that she is now 7 years old and has been moving her way through foster homes for the past 2 years. She has just entered a new home after a series of placements that failed because adults could not cope with her tantrums, stealing, and lying. She has been a challenge from the first day. Although she seemed thrilled to be in the home, calling her foster parent mom immediately, she melts down every night at bedtime and cries and clings when mom leaves the room. Small items from around the house are missing, but when her foster mother confronts Olivia about it, she shuts down, denies taking anything, and then explodes saying, you don't care about me, I hate you. Olivia can be endearing and charming at times, but often feels exhausting. She demands help with many things that her foster parents expect her to be able to do for herself, such as getting dressed, tying her own shoes, etc. And she cries and screams when they suggest she try it for herself. When they try to comfort her, she pushes them away. So, how do we know that Olivia is showing she's having difficulty regulating within this example? We know that, she's crying, shouting, demanding help, lying. So those might be some of our clues that she's showing difficulty regulating. Maybe some possible triggers for her that might be driving that dysregulation maybe are, being confronted, being rejected, being asked to do something on her own, things like that. Her needs, she might just need comfort. She might need connection or reassurance. So notice that the relationship between triggers and needs and dysregulation. If Olivia is triggered by rejection, for example, then being ignored at bedtime might really increase that feeling of distress for her and lead to a tantrum, a really loud tantrum, because it's going to kind of be that attempt for her to get her need for connection met. So keep in mind that relationship between those three things. Now, Olivia's foster parents, let's think about how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, because we know that they're struggling as well. We know that Olivia's not the only one struggling within this. It says that Olivia's foster parents are worn out. They believe they've tried to hang in there with her, but they are confused by her emotions, which are intense and unpredictable. At this point, it feels like they have tried everything, but nothing works. Now, when Olivia begins to throw a tantrum, they feel like it's manipulative and she just is trying to get attention. Their anxiety and anger climb and they find themselves pulling away from her. So that's kind of what Olivia's parents foster parents are experiencing right now. Now, I'm sure that many of you can relate to, those feelings of being worn out, feelings that you've tried everything but nothing works, feeling manipulated, and kind of as a result disconnecting. And these are really, really common feelings for foster parents. We've talked about in earlier sessions that, foster parenting is hard for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of aspects and factors that go into that. But especially because the role that you guys play in supporting a child or teen's ability to self-regulate, all while trying to regulate your own emotions and emotional responses yourself. So while we're going to be talking about a lot of different strategies for supporting children in regulating, it's also important to acknowledge that it's really hard work and can be emotionally draining for foster parents as well. So just to recap, you guys often are trying to soothe a child or a teen who never learned how to be soothed, who is scared and might be triggered by relationships, even if they really crave them. A child who escalates quickly and unexpectedly due to different triggers that sometimes you're not even always aware of. Kiddos who expect to be rejected by you and kicked out of your home, and kiddos who exhaust you. So there's going to be a lot of factors involved in successfully supporting regulation because you guys are dealing with a lot of different factors for the child. Let's see here. So let's take it kind of step by step. Let's go through. We're going to talk about, I think, 3 different sets of tools here. So let's start off with the first set of tools, which is going to be the foundational tools to support self-regulation. So this is going to include being a detective to learn the child or teen's patterns. It's going to include developing daily routines and rhythms, and it's going to include using ongoing activities and using soothing strategies. So there's going to be a couple ways we do this. Excuse me, let me get a drink here. My voice is horrible today. I'm so sorry. So, using your detective skills. Now, what sorts of activities or experiences lead to feeling more or less organized or in control? These are some kind of questions we can ask ourselves. So, what are those activities that can help us gain or lose control? How do we know when a child or teen is comfortable or uncomfortable in their body or their feelings? What are the clues? What patterns of strength and challenge does your child or teen show? When do they do best and when do they predictably have a harder time? The goal here is to kind of target those soothing routines to those times. And then they suggest that you actively track clues every time your child or teen has a hard time because you can use them for next time. So it's important to pay attention to the questions like those on the slide, and they can really help you learn about a child or teen and help you to be more effective in supporting the regulation. Think about what strategy is likely to be effective. When do you use the strategy? Where do you implement the strategy? How do you support the strategy? And then how do you then assess whether or not the strategy was effective? Now we know that being a detective, oh, I lost my spot here. So we know that paying attention, being a detective is also going to require paying attention to your child's energy at different times during the day, and it's going to give us some really important clues about what strategies might be effective. We know that using that kind of language of energy is a really effective strategy for supporting children and teens in communicating their internal experience because it's normative. We all kind of have it. It's neutral. It's not good or bad. And it's less vulnerable to talk about than specific emotions itself. So, we can talk about having a comfortable energy and uncomfortable energy, whether or not we feel like our energy matches our experience around us, things like that. So another foundational tool that can be used is establishing routines and rhythm. So I'm sure that a lot of us wake up every day, kind of go through the same routine. Drinking our coffee, take a shower, brush our teeth, watch the news, things like that. And so we all have routines that we kind of follow throughout the day. And these different rhythms really serve the important purpose of keeping us organized. They keep our days really predictable, and a lot of times they help us to feel just internally balanced. So we know that routines and rhythms often become so much part of our daily rhythm that we only notice them when they're disrupted. So do you guys have any examples of how you might feel if your daily routine is disrupted? Anyone have anything they want to share with that? So I know that when my daily routine is disrupted, I get thrown into a frenzy or a tizzy sometimes. I don't like having my routine disrupted. It makes me feel anxious, things like that. So that might be kind of similar for you guys. Now, routines aren't about rigidity. They're going to be about co-creating a rhythm. And we also know that routines should decrease distress. Routines should never increase stress and distress in children or ourselves. If your routine makes things harder, we should probably look at changing it. So I have a little example here. You know, routines only contribute to regulation if they feel comfortable and they help us function better or more effectively. Routines aren't going to help regulate us if they stress us out and we're becoming less effective in our daily life. So they have the example here of if your boss told you that you'd twirl in place 3 times before entering their office, you'd probably ask why. And you know, your boss might say, because this is our routine, this is what we do here, those are office rules, whatever. So maybe you decide to twirl in place each day, kind of as requested by you, and as a result, you begin to feel dizzy each day. You feel dizzier and dizzier, and the routine might make you feel slightly distressed, kind of as you anticipate entering your boss's office and then during the actual action of twirling itself. So kind of remember that kind of illustration when you think about routines and rhythms to build with children and teens who've experienced trauma. Routines and rhythms should really increase that comfort and the feeling of safety for all parties, not just you as the caregiver. They should not ever be sources of distress. So we can also use routines to target. The goal of routines is not to use them everywhere, but to use them really purposefully. And routines are going to be particularly useful around challenging moments of the day, to kind of support soothing and regulation and to build connection. So maybe homework time's a distressing time or challenging part of the day, maybe bedtime, things like that. So these are going to be natural soothing opportunities during these times. Skip that over here. So it says that Olivia's new routine here. Olivia's foster parents developed a new evening routine that gives Olivia a lot of control and seems to calm her distress. They make picture cards showing each step of her evening, finishing homework, brushing teeth, taking a shower, getting in pajamas. Each card has 2 sides, one showing a child doing the task alone and the other showing the child doing the task with the support of a caregiver. Every evening, Olivia puts her cards in the order she wants to complete them and picks which side of the card she wants, the support or no support. So, why do you guys think that a routine like the new routine developed by Olivia's foster parents might be helpful for a child like Olivia? We discussed earlier how it sounds like she kind of doesn't always like to be told directly what to do. So it looks like this example here gives an element of choice for her. It offers the opportunity for those periods of connection based on what Olivia chooses, whether or not to be helped or not. So we have the choice and control about also not just about the routine itself, but also the level of engagement and support that the caregiver provides. And so this is really going to help kind of regulate Olivia, especially because of her early exposure to that chaos and lack of control and lack of predictability. So this routine is probably going to be really good for her. So kind of moving on to ongoing activities. A lot of activities are naturally regulating. You know, things like play, sports, reading, crafts, listening to music, things like that. And there's going to be a lot of different energy needs that we might have during the day and during the week. And there's going to be a range of activities that can help us to feel energized and engaged or soothed and relaxed. So based on the time of the week, based on our energy level, different things are going to be naturally regulating for us. And so really similarly, it's going to be important to provide predictable and ongoing activities for children and teens that are naturally modulating or soothing for them. Now, let's go back to our earlier discussion about infants. So let's think about strategies used to soothe an infant, rocking, playing, calm music, things like that. Often these strategies that a caregiver uses routinely throughout a given day, usually they use these at times that are generally associated with comfort and safety. And it's the association with the comfort and safety that eventually increases that effectiveness of the strategy during the moments of distress and discomfort. So this is going to be true for children and teens too. Only want to offer strategies to soothe in moments of distress. You want to use them on a regular basis so the child or teen sees them as familiar and connected to regulation itself. If children are presented with a regulation response or a coping strategy only at the moment of that distress, those strategies are probably going to be rejected because the child hasn't had exposure to them and they haven't practiced them before. And the strategies themselves might be associated with the distress and discomfort. So that's why it's important to practice these strategies really regularly. And so there's going to be a number of possible ways or strategies that can be used in an ongoing way to support regulation. There's a ton of different things. I think I have a handout somewhere if you guys want me to email it to you. But because we're online, I don't have the handout. So let's also think about sensory approaches to staying regulated. A lot of us are pretty aware of our sensory diet per se. Some of us might seek a lot more sensory input in some areas and less sensory input in others. So some people might be really sensitive to smells and, might only buy unscented things, cleaning products, bath items for their home because they know that they're sensitive to smells. Other people, might love candles and prefer scented things and things like that. So we can be really sensitive to our sensory inputs. Now that's just olfactory. Now let's think about gross motor activities. Gross motor activities are also going to be able to help children and teens regulate. So each person's different physiology is unique, and each individual is going to have a unique response, even to subtle variations in movement, type of movement, direction of movement, pace of movement, things like that. So think of this as another opportunity to put on your detective hat, with the goal being just to experiment with different types of movement and varying directions, pacing, things like that, to kind of determine which combinations result in regulating or dysregulating responses. And with all the other strategies that we've discussed, we've talked about how a dedicated soothing space can help a child or teen learn how to modulate, both in the moment and over time. And we can really forget how important it is, even for very young children, to feel like they have a space that's theirs. So identifying a space in the home, or even like outside on the porch or something, but identifying a space that can be used as a safe place. Do that, and it can be, as simple as we've talked about, a corner of the room, with a blanket, with some books. It can be more elaborate, but work with your child to decide what kind of tools, whether that's pictures or pillows or sensory objects, what kind of tools should be in that space. And once the space is ready to be used, it's really important to practice using it at several different identified times throughout the day when the child or teen is regulated, as well as those moments of distress and dysregulation. And so building in predictable moments of engagement and connection can help prevent moments of distress or dysregulation too, kind of by providing children and teens with a sense of safety and security. And always remember that lens that we've talked about, that lens that children who've experienced trauma have, both for themselves and others, and think back to those internalized labels that they sometimes have. Shame can really be a big trigger in the moment that leads to dysregulation. And because of this, the more that children and teens are engaged in activities that increase their sense of competence, the less likely they are to experience that shame that's associated with distress. So the second set of tools are the in the moment regulation tools. We've been talking about, ways to build a foundation for regulation. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about the in the moment tools. So a lot of these skills that we're going to discuss here, we've talked about in previous meetings. So here we're just kind of pulling them all together. So Olivia has been getting really upset, yelling and screaming for her foster mother to help her whenever she has had a hard time with something. If her foster mother doesn't respond right away, Olivia will call her names and will sometimes run to her and hit her. Her foster mother has been worried about reinforcing this behavior, so tries to ignore Olivia or tell her she won't answer until Olivia calms down. This seems to be making things worse, and Olivia has been really demanding and aggressive lately. So Olivia's having a hard time. Now, why is it important? So keeping what's going on with Olivia in mind, why is it going to be important to identify and respond to a child or teen's early cues of distress? We know that early response is important because we want to keep the child from getting onto that express road that we've talked about. And as we get to know children and teens, we're going to be able to better able to read those cues and clues really early, but it's going to take some practice and time. So earlier we talked about some of Olivia's different push buttons or triggers and clues of distress. So what do we see in this interaction with her foster mother? Any ideas? Looks like Olivia is getting upset when her needs aren't automatically or quickly filled when her mom doesn't respond right away. It looks like she's having issues in times where she feels like she needs help and gets upset when her foster mom doesn't show up immediately. And it looks like foster mom is now ignoring Olivia's behavior as an attempt to remedy it, but it's just making it worse. So in session 3, if you guys are here, we kind of talked about your own self-care tools. And to review those include preparing yourself, which is, remembering to use self-talk, have a plan, use your supports, take good care of your own basic needs, sleeping, eating, things like that. We talked about in your pocket tools, which is having tools in your pocket in case something unexpected happens. Those are those really concrete strategies like deep breathing, counting to 10, relaxing your muscles, taking a second to walk away, things like that. Recovery tools. So when you've been through something really stressful, it's good to identify strategies that you can use to get yourself back on that main road, calling a friend, making a cup of tea, exercising, things like that. And then ongoing self-care, finding ways to actively attend to your self-care needs on an ongoing basis. What did we talk about? We talked about making time for, to go on a date, to have a friend date, to have a date with your spouse, maybe, having a set time to just like take a bath, go on a walk, things like that, things that you can build in to your schedule. So think about Olivia's foster mom. In this moment, she might need some of those in your pocket tools. For example, Olivia's having these unexpected meltdowns. And so maybe the foster mom, instead of ignoring Olivia, needs to just take a second, step away, count to 10, things like that. So there's a lot of different strategies that we can use. Now, let's talk about what we learned in the last session about mirroring. Mirroring is going to be the primary strategy that we can use to let another person know that we see them, that we're paying attention, and that we understand their needs and how they feel. So think about Olivia in the moment. What strategies might we use for mirroring her? How might we validate or normalize her experience? What behavioral strategies we think of? Things like that. Maybe Olivia just needs to be approached instead of having that withdrawal. Maybe to mirror her, let me look back over here to what all she was doing. Let's see. Maybe, we can mirror her emotions of saying, I'm sorry, it must be frustrating to not have help immediately, things like that. So earlier we talked about some of the different needs that Olivia might be communicating. For instance, reassurance, connection, comfort, things like that. In an earlier meeting, we talked about there's two primary functions of children's and teens' trauma-related behavior. Those two primary functions are safety and getting needs met. So safety, those are those actions designed to keep a child or teen safe in the face of that perceived danger. And getting needs met are actions designed to help the child or teen meet their physical and emotional or relational needs in the face of perceived deprivation or perceived rejection or abandonment. And a key strategy to support regulation when a child or teen is experiencing distress is to meet that need being communicated whenever we can, whenever that's possible. So back to Olivia. It says that as an experiment, Olivia's therapist suggests that when Olivia shows distress, Olivia's foster mother go to her immediately, offer comfort and support, and when she's calm, remind her of the many ways she can ask for help. At first, Olivia's foster mother needs to offer a lot of comfort, holding, rocking, before Olivia calms down, but within a few weeks, this becomes less necessary. The distress calms quickly unless there are other stressors. So that's kind of the solution that they came up with for Olivia. Now, to support a child or teen's use of self-regulation tools, ideally, as part of building that foundational regulation strategies, you and your child or teen are going to have begun to build a toolbox of regulation strategies already. And as these different strategies are kind of solidified, they can be cued or prompted in the moment using 3 strategies, which are modeling, prompting the use of tools, or experimenting. So modeling. We know that shame and vulnerability are really common triggers for children and teens who've experienced trauma. And when they feel these feelings of shame and vulnerability, it can be hard to acknowledge that they're distressed and even harder still to ask for help. So when a trusted adult models vulnerability and shows that or how they use their tools to support regulation, it really allows children to feel safer doing so themselves after witnessing that modeling. And it can really provide opportunities for co-regulation. We can also support the building of self-regulation using prompts by prompting the use of tools. So it's going to be really essential to prompt the use of specific tools instead of making general statements like, just go calm down. We know that regulation is going to be a complicated skill and that kiddos might need support to identify and implement each of the steps involved in the calm down process. So this is also true for children and teens who have shut down or gone numb or who need to wake up or re-engage with the world. And then finally, there's experimenting. If one strategy doesn't work in the moment, just try another. There's no single strategy that's going to work all the time, and even preferred tools might not work when they're most needed. Allowing control and choice. We know that choice and control can be really powerful for children and teens who've experienced trauma. They likely have had, countless experiences where they've experienced lack of control and feelings of powerlessness. So many of those experiences felt threatening and dangerous for them. And ironically, when children and teens are feeling very dysregulated, one of the things that we do as adults is try to keep a situation safe by taking control away. And this can actually escalate the situation rather than helping the child calm down. And this is because perceived loss of control usually acts as a trigger and can lead children and teens to that feeling of increased arousal, and in some situations put them on that express road to survival behavior. And so to avoid triggering and prevent those survival behaviors, we have to find opportunities for control and choice. Kind of like Olivia with her nighttime routine, having the cards set up, but of things that she had to do. We knew that she had to brush her teeth, put on her pajamas, clean up her room, things like that. But she got to choose and control what order those things were done in, and also if she wanted help with them or not. In sessions, in the first, I think, 2 sessions, we talked about how children and teens develop a sense of themselves and of others, kind of that lens for self and the lens for relationships based on their early experiences with caregivers. And so to reduce a child or teen's feeling of shame and hopelessness, it's really essential that you find a way to reconnect or re-engage and repair once everybody is back on that main road. Work on reconnection when everyone's calm. So session 4, we talked about how to handle disconnects, and we mentioned 4 strategies, which is just to reaffirm the relationship, find a way to assure the child or teen that the relationship can exist and continue even when times are hard, reconnect at the child or teen's pace, give the child or teen permission to protect themselves even if you don't think it's needed, give them that grace period for space, make a repair if needed, give apologies, yourself as the caregiver, as the adult, but don't always expect them. And then move on. Try to shift out of the hard and into something positive. You're not reinforcing that negative when you reconnect in the positive ways and kind of work to move on. So to wrap up for today, remember how infants and young children learn to regulate. We know that children and teens who don't get enough soothing as young children usually have a much harder time managing feelings and behavior. And we know that we can help by laying a good foundation, whether it's through routines, ongoing strategies, being engaged and connected, learning patterns, things like that. And we can also help by responding in the moment, reading those clues, using our own tools, and then cueing and supporting the child's tools, offering opportunities for control and reconnecting. So self-reflection for today. They encourage you to think about a time when you're really upset. Think about the ways that you like to manage your feelings. Think about if those preferences are the same for every feeling that you have, or if it's kind of different depending on your mood. So they ask that you just select one feeling and ask, what are you able to independently, what do you do independently to manage your experience? Why do you think that works for you? And in what ways do other people support you? What do you like from others when you're upset? Why do you think that is? So just a lot of questions, self-reflection. For practice, they ask you to take a look around your house. What things within your home do you have already that lends itself to supporting regulation? What kind of things might you need to add? And this can include like physical items or just like daily routines and practices. And then make a list of what you have and what you need. So that's just a little optional practice take home. Otherwise, we are done for the day. We went pretty long today. The next session is June 24th at noon. And then please fill out your evaluations online so you guys can get credit. Thank you so much.